one of the big decisions for players and coaches as players move into adolescence is whether or not to change a player's shooting technique. And I've read a lot of things over the years, back to one of the earliest magazines that I ever read for coaches, that talked about how college coaches typically do not like to change a player's technique, shooting technique. And so they basically recruit shooters, and if they get players who aren't shooters, then they just have different roles for them. And that is what it is. I don't coach college, so I'm not worried about what college coaches are doing. But for high school coaches and youth coaches to look at what a college coach does and say, well, college coaches, they won't change a player's technique, so I'm not going to change a player's technique. I think again we're misunderstanding the different levels of players and different development and age of development and training age. So a college player, you could look at as being already at elite or near elite level, especially a Division I player. For many players, they've already accomplished their goal, especially on the girls' side where there are many fewer professional opportunities. For a lot of female players, the goal is to get the college scholarship to play and graduate from college, whereas on the male side, there's a lot more players with goals of playing professionally. There's certainly female players who dream of playing professionally, but I think the numbers definitely favor male basketball players. And my experience with a lot of female basketball players is that they simply, the goal is to get the college scholarship. And so the goals of a college player are different than the goals of a youth or a high school player. The maturity level, the experience level, their training age, if you will, for basketball. All of these things are different and may contribute to, the reasons that a college coach has for making this decision. For a developmental coach, coaching a youth athlete or an adolescent athlete in high school, the player is at a different stage. So they're still in a developmental stage. They're still learning. They are not an elite or an expert player. They're not at an elite level of competition, regardless of where they're ranked or what AAU team they play on or what high school team they play on. That's not an elite level. Maybe you can make an argument that an under 17 national team player is an elite player, but beyond that, high school players are not elite. You have to reach that high D1 NBA level before I'm going to consider a player to be an elite player. And so they're still at the high school level, and adolescent players still in a developmental stage. They're still learning, and there's still plenty of time for them to develop new skills and to change and relearn established skills. The other thing is, for a high school or adolescent player to move on to the next level or a elite type level in college, they're likely going to have to improve. And especially if it's a situation where you're wondering whether or not to change a player's shot because they're not a good enough shooter, if they want to move on, they're going to have to change their shot, because to move to the next level, unless they're 6'9", they're going to have to be a better shooter to play at the next level. So just because a college coach says I'm not going to worry about changing a player's shot doesn't mean that a youth or a high school coach should take the same approach. Now, when I'm working with a player and I'm deciding whether or not I want to change a player's shot, the biggest thing to me is their dedication and their work ethic, because I don't want to mess with a player's shot if they aren't going to put in the work necessary to make that change. So if a player isn't all in, I'm probably going to back off, and I'm going to take that kind of college coach's approach. And, we're just going to make do with what we have, and hopefully through more practice they can get slightly better, maybe better shot selection, they can shoot a better percentage in games. But if they're not willing to put in the time and the effort, if they don't have the concentration and the maturity to put in that time and effort, then I'm going to, kind of leave them, how they shoot, and maybe try to tweak, something here or there. But I'm not going to make big changes to a player who doesn't have the desire or the concentration or attention to follow through on the change. That being said, if a player does have that desire and does have the goal of becoming a college player and is willing to put in the work to get to achieve that goal, a player that age can definitely make changes to their shot and completely relearn how to shoot. There's plenty of NBA examples. Kawhi Leonard kind of being the poster boy right now of a player who redid his shot to become a great three-point shooter once he reached the NBA. I've worked with players who are already in college who've gone from not very good shooters in high school to 180 shooters in college. I worked with a player who was a pretty good shooter, three-point shooter in high school, but needed to learn how to shoot quicker to get her shot off at the college level and get rid of a set shot. And so she was able to transition to a quicker, more jump shot type shot and shoot with the same, relative percentage, somewhere between 35 and 40% from the three-point line. But with a quicker release where she was able to attempt more shots. So it's definitely possible for a player in late adolescence and into college to make that change. But they have to have the desire. It has to be something they want, not just something that the coach wants. They have to have that concentration, the attention. They have to be willing to take a step back. With the girl that I just mentioned, she spent the whole summer, much of which I was gone when I was working with her individually, and she worked on her own. She took what we had practiced, and she held herself back in games and didn't shoot jump shots in games, worked on being a point guard and creating for other people as opposed to her typical role as a shooter, because she didn't want to interrupt that learning process and kind of revert back to her habits when she hadn't made that full change. So it took a good 2, 3, 4 months to transition from how she did shoot to getting comfortable where she could start to shoot her new shot during scrimmages and practice situations. But throughout the summer, she refrained from shooting jump shots because she didn't want to do anything to destabilize her new shooting technique that she was practicing on her own in workouts. So that's the type of dedication that a player needs to make that change. And a lot of players aren't willing to make that decision. To say, for 3 months, I'm not going to shoot a jump shot in a game because I don't want to destabilize my new movement pattern and revert back to my old pattern. And again, a lot of players aren't willing to do that. So again, just because a college coach has one idea doesn't mean that that's appropriate at the youth or the high school level. But it also doesn't mean that just because a player is not a good shooter that you automatically rush in and change his or her shot. There's definitely other factors involved, especially the player's desire and the player's ultimate goals, and how hard that player is willing to work and concentrate and make that effort to make the change. But with some players, it's better off just trying to fix their shot selection, maybe tweak around their shots without messing with their technique and getting in their head and potentially reducing their confidence because you're trying to make the change because they don't have the desire to put in the work necessary to make that full change from one technique to another. So again, there isn't a definite right answer on whether or not to change a player's technique, but it can be done if it's something that the player wants and is willing to put in the time. But if not, then oftentimes it is better to let the player be and just try to make tweaks to, make slight improvements to their shooting percentages in games.